Okay, welcome everybody. My microphone works. That's what was my test. If you have questions on this session, there is an event app, and if you go to the bottom, you can click on what is explained here, live Q&A, and you can ask any question during the session. And at the end of the session, we'll go through those questions together with Michael. Because we're going to talk about claims management, transforming claims management. We had a session on underwriting before this. We're going to talk about claims. And also, I'm great to say that Michael Cook of PwC is here today. I'll introduce him in a minute. But first, let's look at the wider context of claims, what we do in insurance. Because if you look at what Appian does for insurers, is actually that we have this connected insurance layer in the middle. I've oversimplified an IT legacy structure here at the bottom, where you can see CRM, policy, claims systems, billing systems, document management systems, and accounting systems. And this is not how it looks like. There's probably multiple claim systems, multiple policy administration systems, and a lot of document management systems, and also systems they use in the workplace. So what we do in insurance is actually connect the data that you need in an orchestration layer and support the claims handlers, the underwriters in an insurance company to process claims more efficient, right? Support them to be better, to do that better, more automated, more under control, and have an audit trail. But also what we do is actually include external data, right? From IoT devices, wearables, satellite data, whatever information you need in that process that is provided by an external data provider, and bring that into the process and bring it to the claims handler when they need it. And on the right-hand side, I've tried to explain here that you need to work with partners. Insurance space has a lot of partners, such as loss adjusters, lawyers, service providers to fix the roof of somebody or get rid of the water leakage. You collaborate actually with a claims case with these partners, and that's where a process often breaks down. And we see our customers actually using Appian to also connect with these people to make that process more seamless and that you're all looking at the same data. And then if you have that agile layer in the beginning, it allows you to jump to opportunities, to really think about how to improve things, how to improve your products, maybe to find new products, and really jump into the opportunities that are there in the market, because you have an agile layer allowing you to innovate. So that's in summary what we do in insurance. But we're going to talk about claims today, and what we see what our customers do when they implement that in claims. They can pay out claims faster, more in control way. They automate wherever they can, provide a better service really at the point where a customer really wants to get it, and where they have that's what they have insurance for, and also reduce the claims leakage, right? So basically have control of what you pay out and pay out what the customer expects, and not more, and don't lose it on litigation cases or unnecessary lawyer costs, or et cetera, et cetera. And ultimately create that operational efficiency that we all want. Now, I'm grateful that Michael Cook of PwC is here today to talk about their interesting use case of claims, and we dive into that in a minute. But first, I give you a quick video of something that is online, but we want to show that as a teaser before we dive into the discussion.
In 2020, we actually took over handling claims on behalf of the insurance company that was still highly paper-based.
We knew that we needed to have a much better digitally enabled workforce. This platform needs to enable our claims handlers to handle insurance claims from first notification of loss all the way through to settling the claims and everything in between. And we selected Appian as the best technology to do that.
All right, let me welcome on stage Michael. Would you like to join me?
Thanks,
So first, Michael, great, thanks for being here. And I think you have a fantastic use case of Appian in the claims. Would you like to introduce yourself, actually, and explain what you did, but especially which context you work for PwC?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I do, I should thank my co-star, Dan Silverman, who is in the room. So yeah, well done, Dan. I just wanted to thank for that. So my role at PwC is I lead the claims advisory practice. Actually, one of my roles technically at PwC. So I lead everything we do in insurance claims. And I guess the context of this situation is a part of our claims transformation journey when we decided that we should look into end-to-end claims handling. So you heard a little of that on the video. In 2020, we moved into the world of handling claims end-to-end. So we moved out of purely just advisory services, which is what we've done historically for clients, into us actually running our own claims operation. And that's, I guess, the story we'll dive into a little bit today in terms of how that came about and also what we did within that transformation and the critical role that Appian played in that claim transformation journey.
Right, yeah, thank you. And I put the slide up actually about how do you look at claims transformation within PwC.
Yep.
Would you like to explain what is on this slide for the audience?
Yeah, there's a couple of really important points here. I think when you sit on the advisor's side, it's always very easy to work with clients to give them advice on what they should do. Now, for me personally, and it's the same for a lot of the team, we base that on our experience of actually working in the industry. So I spent the first 10 years of my career as a claims adjuster. I was a London market adjuster, so I handled pretty much every type of horrendous claim that exists. But when you're then not on that industry side, I say it's very easy to fall into that situation of just telling others what they should do. The thing we were really conscious of when we were in that situation is we had to do to ourselves effectively what we talk to our clients about. So when we had this situation come up, we had to look at it very much as a claim transformation, not a traditional BPO or business process outsource. This was an opportunity for us to transform how a claims operation worked rather than just effectively go through the motions of doing the same thing as that team had done for the last 10 plus years. And therefore our whole mindset here was how can we transform this? And that was looking at the people angle, the process angle, the technology angle, and the data aspects. And I know we'll dive into some of those, but it was really important for us to approach it with that mindset of how we would then deliver value back to our end client.
Great, yeah. So let's dive into that example, because we're talking about a specific use case and what happened with you in your teams. Because you got a lot of experience in claims, but this came on your path, right? Can you explain a bit about the start and what were we talking about? What was actually the context of this opportunity?
Absolutely. So I'm sure everyone in the room remembers 2020. It was this year that this thing called COVID came along. I'm sure it's still fresh in most people's minds.
Yes, I remember that.
Well, COVID actually was the catalyst for this particular opportunity because the client that we now have, their existing provider, could no longer meet the requirements of the contract they had because of the COVID pandemic. And you may think that seems very strange. Why was that? Well, previously, before we transformed this operation, the business was pretty much paper-based. It did use an old legacy platform. It required staff to be in the office to access files. It required staff to be in the office to access data from historical records. And they had no ability to remotely access their system. So literally, our client was in the situation of we have no one now to actually handle these claims on our behalf because obviously of the restrictions that took place in 2020. So that was the kind of problem statement that initially came to us. I will say that it was a pretty interesting opportunity to work on during the pandemic. And we did very quickly work through that in terms of our ability to then take over that contract, transferring 65 people into our organization, running a technology selection process that, again, we had to do pretty much virtually because there was very little in-person contact, and reassuring a whole team of people that they were going to move from the organization they did work from into our organization and onboard them, again, in a completely remote situation.
Wow. But it must have been, you saw it as an opportunity right from the start. It's what the industry called a closed claims book, right?
Yep.
But it was still very much alive in terms of, as I understand it, new claims were reported, still a lot.
Yep.
But you saw it and you saw the opportunity.
Yeah, and I think, Gijsbert, it comes back to that claims transformation thing that I mentioned at the beginning, right? If we'd looked at this in terms of us just taking over the same service, that has less appeal because we're not really delivering any additional value. If you're just doing the same thing that the previous people were, you're just going through the motions. So we looked at this as that opportunity to not only solve this client's challenge in what was a very difficult period of time, but equally build a platform that we could then go on to build on top of, not only for this client, but also for other clients. So one of the key aspects that we looked at when we did the technology selection is we looked at package systems versus effectively low-code platforms, obviously such as Appian. But we looked particularly at the ability for us to continuously improve. Again, I think one of the key things for us was it wasn't only that initial transformation that we worked on to get the business where we wanted to for kind of day one. It was also how does that platform enable us to continue to improve and make those changes as we go through, not only year one, but year two and beyond to deliver that additional value back to the client.
Right, so that's the vision that you had.
Exactly.
That determined the selection
Yes.
of the platform. And then you have to do it, right? I mean, you have to mobilize this whole thing that you have in mind. How did you go about that?
Well, it definitely required some leaps of faith, I would say, because again, personally, I and a number of the team had experience of running claims operations. I said I was in the industry for 10 years. So the first thing is we knew that we were confident we could deliver the outcomes in terms of our skills and capabilities. We knew that Appian was a platform that would deliver what it needed to, but there was a huge amount of unknowns in that whole landscape, that whole ecosystem. And as I said, in the pandemic, it was very difficult to get a view of a lot of those things because you could not engage with people in the usual course of business, right? You were very much down to remote pieces. So we had to mobilize a team of people, a very large team of people, with lots of different capabilities to make sure that actually we could bring all those pieces together. We could start the project, and again, time was ticking because I say the client had a no pun intended, but a genuine burning platform issue, and we needed to make sure that we were up and running as quickly as possible. Now, that also partly came back to the system selection because we knew that we could deploy value quickly in Appian. So actually, and I know we'll talk a little bit more about this, we delivered our first deployment in 5 months. That included a data migration. So that was really critical because we had to get off the legacy platform as soon as possible. And that mobilization also gave us an opportunity to really understand the data, the processes, the people, so that, as I mentioned right at the beginning, we weren't just putting in a new technology platform, it was also the opportunity for us to transform the way people worked, what they did, how they did it, and deliver that additional value.
Wow, that's a lot. Whilst people were at home. You had to have calls with these people online, I suppose.
Yes, yep, and that's even difficult building a trust and rapport with people, which you need to in that situation. Yep. And you imagine what it felt for the people, that 65 people that we were transferring in. We didn't get to meet or interact with those people for quite a period of time in the way we would have wanted to. Yep. So actually building that faith and trust in them was really critical because, again, they are a key part of that success. And it's one of the things often in claim transformations or any transformation that's not focused on enough is the people aspect. Right? It's not just about the technology, it's how those two things interact.
Well, we come back to the people aspect. And, But let's look at that transformation. You mentioned 5 months. It sounds like an incredible lift and shift project. We explained on the slide a bit what the claims transformation was about. Would you be able to explain a bit what's on this slide in terms of what the transformation was about and how you handled it?
Yeah, sure. So if we think about the structure we have here, so obviously we had to come up with what was a minimum viable product for us to deliver in that first release. So that informed kind of that sprint plan. So it was very much, it was an agile approach, normal agile, not scaled, but an agile approach to deliver, but very much focused on that first release, right? So the first release was critical, not only because it started to put the new system in the hands of the claims handlers, it enabled us to move off the legacy system, right, which was critical to part of our delivery. So making sure that plan worked was key in terms of the build. We also then had to make sure that we could do that data migration. So the data model became, really important, not only in terms of the migration, but also what we were looking at is how did we unlock the value of the historical data asset. So for this type of claims, these are long tail claims that we were taking over. So we have many more thousands of closed claims than we do open claims. And therefore, actually, how do we get into that value, not only for day one, but how do we continue to access that value as we go forward? So making sure we had the right data model, way of accessing that data was critical. Again, partly came back to the system choice as to why we picked Appian. The workflow is another key aspect here, because if you look at most historical claim systems, and even actually a lot of the more modern claim systems, you get no visibility from a workflow perspective of how long anything takes or where it's stuck. What you generally get is a record of financial transactions, right? So you'll get a first notification of loss, you'll get an initial reserve, you'll get payments, et cetera, et cetera. Yep. And these type of claims are managed over months and years, not days and weeks. So actually, the workflow, not only in terms of driving the right claim to the right people, but also being able to analyze exactly how long that takes at each step. So we can produce, for example, metrics on every single claims handler so we know what their effectiveness and efficiency is. And that's really important when you're thinking about that from an overall workflow perspective. It's not just the orchestration of the workflow, it's also actually how that work flows through the human beings as well as through the technology, right? So that granularity of data that we got was really, really important. And I guess just the one other thing I'll touch on here will be the efficiency point. So, and again, we'll probably get into this a little bit more, but in that first release, we delivered 30% efficiency gain. So you think about that, in that 5-month period, we went from an old legacy system to a brand new shiny system, and we delivered 30% efficiency as we went through that first release. We then went on to deliver a further 10% efficiency in the remainder of that year. And again, that comes back to both that MVP approach in terms of what we delivered initially, but also being able to unlock the value through Appian of the other improvements we could make. And most of those improvements actually came from the team. And I think, again, back to that people point, we ran a whole process, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as well when we get to touch on the people, but that people engagement was critical for that additional efficiency gain that we made in that first year.
I'd like to hone in on that data model for just
Sure.
because we went over that, and thanks for explaining this slide, very interesting. Because normally a data model is defined by a claim system, right?
Yes.
It's that's great.
Yep.
But it also creates some frustration. If I speak for myself, you have to go through certain screens to capture a claim, and then you say okay, and then you got the claim, you get a number. You did it in a very different way, right? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but can you explain a bit better, more about how you came about that data model? I understand you may have looked at it in a different way of how to do it.
Yeah, and I think it came back to some of those factors, Gijsbert, in terms of one, understanding the totality of our data population.
Yep.
So I think that's one of the other things. Don't allow the data model to restrict the data that you need, but not only the data that you need today, but the data you're going to need in the future.
Yep.
And that future piece was quite critical. It's not only the data you're going to need, but it's also how you're going to want to access that data, what you're going to want to do with that data. So you've got to be more forward thinking in that data model.
Yep.
To stop you get into a situation where you're like, oh, that's great, but I now don't have the data to action that particular thing.
Yep.
We also then had to construct the data model in a way that enabled us to both, I guess, orchestrate improvement in the system, but also make sure that we could get data out, but not just in classic reporting sense, right? Actually, how could we do things in a much more dynamic way? So the way we constructed that data model allowed us much more flexibility in how we bring in the data, how we use the data, and also how we extract the data.
Yeah.
Interestingly, it also then meant that we had to, as we migrated the data, we had to construct that model also because the legacy provider literally just provided us with data fields. So we had to literally build that entire data model from scratch because there was nothing historically to work on. So once we'd done that, we then had to do the data mapping exercise to make sure we could suck in that data to align to the data model.
Fantastic. So if I say it differently, you looked at what does the business need?
Yes.
What does the process need?
Yes.
How do we bring this forward? And then define the data model that's
exactly
supporting that.
Yeah, and not just for day one. I think that for me is the critical point. It was also thinking about where we want to get to.
Yeah.
And that wasn't just the day one or even the first year. That was for multiple years in the future.
Yeah. And that probably involved lots of conversation with the people who were handling the claims to say, what data do you need to do your job?
Exactly. And then what data do you need to provide to clients? What data do you need to provide to other stakeholders? So it's a pretty big piece of work that you have to do in a pretty compressed period of time.
Yes. So you said 5 months.
5 months.
You went live.
We went live.
And if I'm well informed, that included a Christmas.
That did include Christmas, and we did take Christmas off just in case anyone was worrying about. Yeah, we did actually go into suspense over the Christmas period.
Fantastic. So let's look at also that success and the continuous improvements a bit more, because you mentioned you had that forward-looking that defined the process, the data model. I understand you also looking further for further improvements, right? Can you tell a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll come back to, and you can see in the bottom, actually, there's a couple of pictures, although they're really small of the team.
Yeah.
But so I think when you're doing a claim transformation, it is really important to engage the people. Right? It's not only to get their ideas, and it's so they feel a part of it. Right? You do transformations with people, not to people. So one of the key aspects that we did is we ran a series of focus groups, and actually they were run by the team. We were also really conscious of the team moved organisation, and we didn't want them feeling we were doing this to them. So we set up the infrastructure, but we actually had the team themselves run these improvement sessions. And they came up with what was a pretty long list of things that they really wanted to achieve. Now, to be clear, this was not improvements to the system, to Appian that we'd rolled out. This was things they wanted to generally be able to do, as opposed to what they could do in their legacy system. So we used that input, along with obviously some of the things we'd already wanted to do in terms of improvement to the process and improvement to the information we were extracting, to begin to create that continuous improvement plan so that we could then start to build additional releases over that first year and gradually change both functionality within the system, but also fundamentally how it worked. So workflow was a good example. When we first took the operation over, workflow was still done effectively manually in terms of allocating claims to people. Someone literally went into the system every day and they allocated the work that had come in, and they allocated it to someone to do. That was one of the very first things that we replaced. So Appian, we were taking advantage of the process orchestration and the workflow content, and therefore Appian was allocating the claims instead of having people do it. Now, that had two advantages for us. One, an efficiency gain, because we're now leveraging the technology. Secondly, we could redeploy the people to do other things. Right, and I think that's one of the other key aspects for us here. When we looked at all the improvement, it's always been about how can we better use humans and technology and data, not how can we replace them. So all the efficiency gains we've made, we have effectively taken those people and reused them So they're all doing, some of them are doing different things, some of them are working on this, but they're all doing other things that we've enabled through that type of delivery of this continuous improvement. And bearing in mind, we're now multiple years into this, that continues to today.
Wow, it must have been in that group that you see at the bottom in the small picture,
Yep.
there must have been different people standing up, right? Like unexpectedly being good at process analysis or happy to continue handling claims and doing the things that they've done all the time. Or there's probably different people standing up, I suppose.
Yep. Yeah, I would say they probably split into three groups. And I always think these things are surprising when you do these because you never know how people are going to react. But I think they split into three groups. Actually, there were a group of people who were still happy coming in and doing their job in a new way, but still that's very much what they wanted to do. They liked handling claims. And don't get me wrong, that's really important and we absolutely need that. The second group of people were actually the ones who, you say, were probably more the slight surprise because they were really leaders and champions and they were coming up with lots of those ideas. So in fact, some of that group drove those workshop sessions I talked about because they were the ones who were much more forward thinking and could really see the potential and how to unlock that. So we had that group of people. And then we probably had a much smaller third group of people who were people actually who, whilst they enjoy doing that type of stuff, saw this as an opportunity to do something different. And actually that group of people have gone on to do different things within our firm. So they don't work on this anymore, but they've very much seen this as a catalyst for them taking on different roles. Interestingly, quite a lot of those were in the same areas of technology improvement. So actually they took their learning from this and they've gone on to do some different things.
Oh, wow. Fantastic. So there's data and MI. Is that used by the team or the team leaders or?
Yeah, it's so the data MI is a combination. So we have, if you like, the day-to-day layer of that. So this is basically what the operations leads use in terms of making sure that everything is being done as it's being done. We have a number of key performance indicators and service levels that we have to attain to. So at a minimum, that is what the data and MI is supporting. So the team's making those right decisions and making sure that everything is going through as it needs to. The second layer then is that operational piece I mentioned. So we can see that efficiency across all of our team. And that's something that myself and Dan and Rian, who's also in the audience, we use that on a weekly basis to make sure that everything's running okay. But then there's these two other areas which I think are particularly important. One is ultimately our client and our clients need to access that data for various reasons. So actually we've been able to turn what was effectively static reporting in the old world, so literally producing reports, into now dashboards that are dynamic. So they have access to that same operational data. They also have access to claim data, right? So obviously looking at trends, you mentioned earlier about, while this is a closed book, actually for the last 2 years, the number of claims have increased, not decreased, right? So we've seen that in two main areas in the last 2 years. So they also get to see all of that analysis, right? So what does that mean from a claims volume perspective? What does that mean for the individual types of claim? But it's in a dynamic reporting. So we're giving them access to that data as opposed to, that static area. And then the last one, which for me selfishly is probably the most important, that's how we use that data to drive further improvement.
Yeah.
And that is critical, right? And that's, again, one of the things we're looking at is how we continue to use both the current data that comes in with the new claims that get filed and the claims we're handling, but also how we use that historical series of claims that we've got to actually unlock value for what we do in the future. So it's a huge valuable asset, and we absolutely have to make sure we continue to use that.
Fantastic. So we're actually talking about the data from the policy, from the claim system, that kind of data, which is very useful, but also the transactional data that you get from the workflow and all the improvement and learn from that and improve your process. Yeah, that's great. Well, we talked about people and governance, actually, which I like. But can you explain a bit more? I mean, you say like you got these three kind of groups of people, but can you tell a bit more like what it meant for the motivation of the people that were actually working on this? Because it must have been quite different from what they were using in the past and what they're using now.
Yes. Yeah, and again, noting that period of time, as we said, it was quite difficult to really get natural human engagement at the beginning of that process because of the pandemic. But actually what we saw is people who came into our firm as part of a TUPE transfer, who were quite skeptical. And they were quite skeptical because historically where they had been underinvested in as individuals, they'd been underinvested in from a career perspective, they'd also been underinvested in terms of technology. And they'd been made many promises in the past that actually, we'll spend money and we'll fix this and we'll fix that. And guess what happened? None of those things ever happened. So of course, when we come along and say, don't worry, trust us, we're going to build this fantastic new system and we're going to move into this world of continuous improvement, rightly so, there were some skeptics in the room. What I've loved is that some of those people who were probably the most skeptical at the beginning are now some of the greatest evangelists. And that really took two things, right? One, it took that leap of faith from those individuals to trust us that we would do all the things that we said. And most importantly, we actually had to do all the things that we said, right? We had to deliver those things. They had to see Appian being used. They had to see the benefits of them doing that. They had to see how it made them, their ability to do their job day to day easier, right? How it enabled them to do better and different things, how it enabled them to look at their career differently, as opposed to where they were historically, where that just was not an option.
Wow.
So that human story, and it's one of the things actually, if you talk to any of the team, that's one of the things that personally I really loved about that, is hearing some of those personal stories and just seeing that value in those people get unlocked. And it just sat dormant for years.
Fantastic. So it's not just about unlocking data, it's about unlocking value.
People's important. People is important.
Fantastic. I love it. So that's not the end of the story.
Nope.
You're continuing. And I think, can you tell a bit more before I know a bit what you are planning to do, but what do you would like to share with the audience here? Like what you are planning to do with where you are now and where you want to expand, actually? Yeah,
so I guess, bringing this up to date, obviously that was 2020 through 2021. And then over the 2022, 23, and now into 24. So during 2022, 23, we continued with a number of those improvements. And we started to really look at how we could use, wider technology connected through Appian to deliver some of those more improvements that we looked at. And it's very much about maintaining this continuous improvement mentality, right? So we talked right at the beginning, initially you go through a transformation, but you've got to come out of transformation into BAU. But what we didn't want to happen was you kind of go over a transformation hump and then BAU becomes a flat line. And that's generally what we see, right? Normally, if you're out in the market, you see someone that go through a system implementation, they make a lot of improvements, and then they stop. And then they just carry on. And then at some point in the future, they then do another transformation and they repeat the pattern. We did not want that to happen. So instilling that continuous improvement mentality was really important, right? So we continued that through those years. And obviously this small technology thing that a few people may have heard of called AI emerged.
I heard about it.
Yeah. That's pretty good. We know at the end of the round just mentioned it. But so what AI has started to unlock for us is the ability, again, to leverage the technology platform, the data that we've got, to begin to better enable the humans. And I think it's really, really key that we focus on that. We have not looked at AI about replacing humans. We have looked at it about better enabling humans, and also removing any part of the process that still was suboptimal from where it could be. So for example, the first thing that we built using AI was an email ingestion tool. So most of our inbound claim correspondence comes via email and attachments.
Yep.
So obviously historically would have to be, some information is keyed into the system, some was loaded in, but actually now none of that is touched by a human being. It all comes in via an AI email ingestion tool. What that does is actually reads all the inbound correspondence, and it decides whether that's a new claim or an existing claim. And if it's a new claim, it creates a claim record and it allocates it to the individual. If it's an existing claim, it updates that information. And if it can't work out the answer, it refers it to a human being. We're at like 99 point something % in terms of automation achieved in that. We've had to work through a few interesting use cases. I mentioned one of this earlier. I was chatting to somebody, the AI did not recognize emojis. So we had that in emails where people were using emojis and the AI didn't know what to do with an emoji. So some of those things you've had to work through, but that has now completely changed that front end part of our process. And now we've just finished a series of proofs of concept actually where we're looking at some of the large documents we receive. So generally these claims contain extensive legal reports, medical reports, and then we'll have things like witness statements and various other things. Now, some of those documents are particularly voluminous. So a medical report could be 500 pages. Wow. So that takes a human being a very long time to read. There's a couple other points I'll pick up on there as well in terms of what happens when human beings read that amount of data. But the first thing was, how can we now summarize that information so that actually, again, we're better enabling the human in order for them to make the right decision as to what to do next in that particular claim. Now, there's two other points I mentioned. Humans are also inconsistent. AI is not inconsistent. Yep. So one of the other things, actually, we can improve the level of consistency we've got in what to do next or what to recommend next by using that AI layer. The other thing is that if you're reading something for multiple hours, the data you retain at the beginning and the data you retain at the end are very different. Right? Humans lose concentration quite quickly. AI does not. So actually, it really helps to compress that down because, again, we're giving humans a smaller amount of data they need to consume. And we've also found in those proofs of concept that AI does live up to the intelligence piece because it also spots things. So it doesn't just do intelligent word searches. It also understands the drugs that are used to treat certain conditions. And if it finds the reference to a particular drug, it will alert you to that condition, even though that condition may not be mentioned in the report. It will understand medical acronyms. So again, it will then point out to you that actually this acronym relates to this condition. So you're also getting that intelligence layer, not just in terms of summarizing what's there. It's very much also understanding what's there and giving you other things for you to look at. But again, the way that's all provided back to the claims handler is data for them to consume in order to make the decision as to what they do next, not data to replace that human decision making.
Wow, that's advanced claims handling and supporting the claims handler.
That is.
That's fantastic. And you're, just for the audience, we talked about the first book of business, but you are looking at other books of businesses, right, to expand this journey also elsewhere.
Yep. Yeah, and that comes, almost goes full circle back to the beginning, right? When we were making that technology choice and when we were thinking about what we needed to do, we wanted to build a platform that would enable us to scale, not only in terms of that particular client situation, but as I mentioned right at the beginning, other situations. Yep. So we now have other portfolios that we have now successfully attained. And a lot of the reason we were able to attain those ones is because we could tell this story. Not only tell the story, but we could use the data items as proof points, right? So 30% efficiency year one, in the first release, 10% additional in year two. All that technology build, all that process improvement, they're all things that we've referenced in then helping us secure those other projects, because we had that whole body of evidence that supported the work that we have done over the last 4 years. And now we have a number of effectively client portfolios live on that platform. And we will continue to use that as our platform going forward. Right? So it's now a fundamental part of our proposition of how we effectively take these businesses, transform them, and then continue to improve them.
Fantastic. I would like one piece of advice for the audience, but before we do that, I'll have a look at my iPad to see if there's questions from the audience, because I think there might be some. I might need some help because I don't see questions, but there might be questions in the audience. Are there questions? Not yet. Okay, well, there's one in the back from Frederick God.
Hello, guys. Thanks for the presentation. Just a quick question. I would like to know if you succeeded to replicate what you've done with this customer with another insurance company.
If you want to replicate what you've learned, so you are exploring other books of business to retain. So this business is expanding, but perhaps can I rephrase your question that maybe you want to?
No, it's fine.
Okay, all right. But it's a good question. So if that wasn't clear, you are expanding this managed service in other books of businesses, right?
Absolutely, and we're also using the learnings. So perhaps coming up to the piece of advice point, we're also using the learnings from the last 4 years in how we do that. So our start position is now much more advanced than it was 4 years ago because we've now further developed the Appian solution. We further developed the data model, we further developed the technology around it so that we are now able to effectively further accelerate any of our future deliveries because we've got 4 years of learning that we can now effectively reuse.
Fantastic.
So absolutely, it's all about that broader continuous improvement.
And it must also be very interesting to feed it back into your consultancy services where you really, you had experience already on claims management, but it's just enhancing it even further, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting actually because, and Gijsbert, you'll know this having worked in industry as well, whenever you sit in front of a claims executive or an industry executive and you've had the same role that they have, you have a natural empathy, right? So I have an advantage over a career consultant because I did that for 10 years. I left the industry as a claims director and that gives you that natural empathy. This also gives us another unique dynamic because when we say to people, and by the way, we also run our own claims operation, people are genuinely interested when I say, okay, so what have you done with your operation? How did you pick your technology? How are you using artificial intelligence? And I would say, based on what I see, we are probably at the cutting edge of using AI in absolute real situations, right? Not just in theory, not just on PowerPoints.
Nope.
We are actually using it day in, day out. So that is a huge advantage that we have because we get to talk about what we've actually done, so practical, as opposed to just theory.
Yeah.
Right? And this is something we live, day in, day out.
So maybe one piece of advice for the audience that are maybe facing this issue?
So I think for me, the critical thing here is understand and think through where you really want to get to and then how you want to get there. Because if we'd have started and just thought about, well, we just want to take this initial client on and we want to transform it, that would have led to a very different set of decisions. And that would have also meant that we would have limited our future ability to deliver those improvements and build a scalable platform. It was the fact that we started with thinking this could be a fundamentally much bigger offering, and therefore then we thought about, okay, so if we want to get there, how do we get there? Right? So set that ambition, be brave, because it definitely takes some braveness and those leaps of faith I talked about, but if you set your ambition, then I think you get to a better place rather than just set that horizon here. You do still need to think about how you get there, so clearly you're not going to get there day one, but here we are 4 years later, and we are continuing to deliver on that ambition.
Fantastic. That's a good piece of advice. Well, thanks, Michael, for being in this discussion and share your thoughts, your experience. And thank you very much. And a bit of applause maybe for...
Thank you.